Story 1. Late Night Security. Working as a night shift security guard isn't as exciting as most people imagine. Sure, Hollywood makes it seem like we're dealing with high-stakes heists or catching criminals in the act every other night. But in reality, it's long hours, stale coffee, and watching empty hallways on a grainy monitor. That was my life at a downtown office building. Quiet, boring, and uneventful. At least, that's how it used to be. The building was a 12-story relic from the 80s, complete with flickering fluorescent lights and the occasional creaky elevator. My shift started at 9 p.m. and ended at 5 a.m., and during those hours, I was usually the only living soul in the place. Most tenants left by 6 p.m., and the cleaning crew would finish up by 8 p.m., leaving me with nothing but silence for the rest of the night. It was a Tuesday when things got strange. I started my shift like usual, grabbed the clipboard from the desk, checked the maintenance log, and poured myself a cup of coffee from the ancient machine in the break room. The first few hours were uneventful, as always. I walked my rounds, checked the locks on the ground floor, and made a note about a broken vending machine in the lobby. At around midnight, I was back in the security office watching the monitors. The building had cameras on every floor, in the stairwells, and in the parking garage. Most of the screens showed nothing but static spaces, empty hallways, quiet offices, and dark staircases. But as I was zoning out, something flickered on the screen for the 8th floor. It was subtle at first, just a quick movement that could have easily been a glitch or a shadow from passing headlights outside. But when I looked closer, I saw a figure, a man, walking down the hallway. He wasn't carrying anything, and he wasn't wearing a uniform. He didn't belong. I reached for the walkie-talkie, more out of habit than anything, even though I knew I was the only one on duty. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaky. "Anyone in the building? You're not supposed to be here." The man on the screen didn't react. He kept walking down the hallway, his pace slow and deliberate, like he was searching for something. I switched the camera view to follow him as he moved from one hallway to another. He stopped at a door, one of the offices, and tried the handle. Locked. He moved to the next one and did the same thing. By now, my adrenaline was pumping. The protocol for dealing with intruders was clear. Call the police, stay safe, and monitor the situation. But I thought I'd check it out first, just in case this guy was lost, or some confused tenant working late. Grabbing my flashlight and keys, I took the elevator up to the 8th floor. The ride up was tense. I could hear my own heartbeat over the soft hum of the elevator motor. When the doors opened, the hallway was silent. My flashlight beam cut through the dim light, illuminating rows of closed office doors. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing. "Security. If you're in here, you need to leave." No response. I checked the offices where I'd seen him trying the handles. They were all locked, as they should have been. There was no sign of the man. I returned to the security office, thinking maybe he'd left. But when I sat back down at the monitors, my stomach dropped. There he was again, this time on the 5th floor. He was walking down the hallway, stopping at doors just like before. I switched cameras, trying to keep track of him. But every time I changed the angle, it felt like he was one step ahead of me. The more I watched, the more I noticed something strange about him. His movements were jerky, almost mechanical, and he never looked up at the cameras. I picked up the phone to call the police, but as soon as I dialed, the screens went black. All of them. The only thing left was my reflection staring back at me in the monitors. A soft noise broke the silence. A door creaking open. It came from the stairwell just outside the security office. My heart pounded as I shone my flashlight on the door. now slightly ajar. "Hey!" I shouted, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. "You're not supposed to be here." No response. The door slowly closed, and I could hear faint footsteps heading up the stairs. Against my better judgment, I followed. The stairs were cold and narrow, the kind of space that made you feel like the walls were closing in on you. I climbed cautiously, every creak of the metal stairs making my pulse quicken. On the 10th floor landing, I froze. The man was standing at the top of the stairs, his back to me. He was tall and wearing a dark hoodie, but something about him seemed wrong. His shoulders were too broad, his stance too rigid, like he wasn't entirely human. "Sir, you need to leave," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've already called the cops." He didn't move. Slowly, he turned his head, not his body, just his head, toward me. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and his lips twisted into a faint smile. I stepped back instinctively, my grip on the flashlight tightening. Without a word, he sprinted down the hallway. I chased after him, but when I turned the corner, he was gone. Just gone. I spent the rest of the night locked in the security office, the lights on, and my flashlight close at hand. The monitors came back on eventually, but there was no sign of him. When my shift ended, I reported everything to my supervisor, but he just shrugged it off, saying I'd probably seen a homeless guy or some kid messing around. But I know what I saw, and I'll never work another night shift again. Story 2. The Late Night Traveler. Working the night shift at a gas station isn't exactly glamorous, but it pays the bills. I'd been at this particular station, a 24-hour spot just off a rural highway, for about 6 months. Most nights were uneventful. A few truckers coming through for coffee, the occasional drunk college kid looking for snacks, and hours of scrolling through my phone to pass the time. But one night changed everything. It was a Wednesday, and the shift started like any other. The station was quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and I was half asleep behind the counter, sipping a cup of lukewarm coffee. Around midnight, a beat-up sedan pulled into the lot. I didn't think much of it. Cars came and went all night. But this one just sat there with its engine running for a good 5 minutes. I glanced at the car a few times, expecting someone to come in, but no one did. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't see the driver. Eventually, the engine shut off, and the car went completely dark. Still, no one got out. My unease started to grow. Maybe they're just taking a nap, I told myself. It wasn't unheard of for people to stop and rest on long drives. But something about this felt off. I decided to focus on restocking the shelves to shake the nerves. As I was arranging the chip aisle, I heard the distinct chime of the front door opening. I turned to see a man standing in the doorway, but he didn't come in right away. He just stood there, staring at me. "Evening," I said, trying to sound casual. "Let me know if you need anything." The man didn't respond. He stepped inside slowly, his movements deliberate, like he was sizing the place up. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and a dirty baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He was wearing a faded hoodie and jeans, both of which looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. He wandered the aisles aimlessly, picking up random items and putting them back down. I kept an eye on him from behind the counter, my hand hovering near the panic button under the register, just in case. After a few minutes, he came up to the counter with a single bottle of water. I scanned it, and he handed me a crumpled $5 bill. "Anything else for you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone friendly. "No," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly. But he didn't leave. He stood there, staring at me with this vacant expression, like he was waiting for something. Have a good night, I said, sliding his change across the counter. He didn't move. The tension in the air was suffocating. Finally, he grabbed the water and walked out the door. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I watched as he got back into the car, turned on the engine, and drove off. Relieved, I went back to my routine, chalking it up to just another weirdo passing through. But about an hour later, the car came back. This time, the man didn't get out. He just parked near the edge of the lot, his headlights off, and sat there. My stomach tightened as I watched him from the counter. After 10 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the phone and called the local sheriff's office. The dispatcher assured me they'd send someone out to check on things. While I waited, I tried to act like everything was normal, but my nerves were shot. I kept glancing at the car, half expecting the man to storm in at any moment. About 15 minutes later, I saw the red and blue lights of a patrol car pulling into the lot. The relief I felt was overwhelming. The officer approached the sedan, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but after a few minutes, the officer walked over to me. He says he's just resting, the officer explained. Claims he's been driving all day and needed a break. Did he say why he came in earlier? I asked, my voice trembling. The officer shook his head. He didn't mention it. Look, if he bothers you again, give us another call. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely reassured. The sedan drove off again, and the patrol car followed it for a while before disappearing down the highway. I tried to get back to work, but my nerves were shot. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting the man to come back. Around 3 a.m., just when I started to relax, the power went out. The station plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the emergency lights. My heart raced as I grabbed my flashlight and looked around. A loud bang echoed from the back of the building. I froze. It sounded like someone was trying to force open the back door. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice shaky. No response. I crept toward the back, my flashlight trembling in my hand. As I got closer, I heard it again. Bang, bang, bang. Whoever it was, they were trying to break in. I bolted back to the counter and hit the panic button. The alarm blared to life, piercing the silence. Seconds later, I heard the screech of tires as a car sped away from the lot. When the sheriff arrived, I told them everything. They found the back door dented, but still locked. The sedan was nowhere to be seen. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of anxiety, and when the morning crew arrived, I handed them the keys and left without a word. I never worked another night shift again. Story 3. The beat-up bouncer. Being a security guard at a nightclub in Atlanta isn't for the faint of heart. I'd worked at the Velvet Room for about a year, and while I'd seen my fair share of drunken arguments and brawls, nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. It was a Friday, the kind of night where the line to get in wrapped around the block. People came to the Velvet Room to escape their stress, drink, and dance the night away. My job was to make sure everyone who got in was sober enough to stay out of trouble, or at least keep their trouble manageable. Around 10 p.m., a group of 4 guys showed up at the door. From the moment they stepped out of their car, I could tell they were trouble. They were loud, unsteady on their feet, and already swaying to music that wasn't even playing yet. "Yo, man, let us in," one of them slurred as they approached me. "You guys been drinking already?" I asked, keeping my tone firm, but not confrontational. "Nah, just a couple beers," the leader of the group said, his words slurring together as his friends laughed behind him. I shook my head. Sorry, fellas. I can't let you in like this. Come back tomorrow, sober. Their laughter stopped, replaced by an icy silence. You serious? The leader said, stepping closer. His breath reeked of alcohol. Club policy, I replied, crossing my arms. I can't let anyone in who's too intoxicated. It's for everyone's safety. The man glared at me, his friends muttering curses under their breath. One of them pointed a finger in my face. You're making a big mistake, man. Step back, I said, keeping my voice steady. You're not getting in. Move along. After a tense moment, they finally left, cursing and stumbling their way back to their car. I figured that was the end of it. Another group of drunks turned away. Nothing new. The rest of the night was uneventful. A few minor scuffles inside, but nothing I couldn't handle. By the time the club shut down at 3 a.m., I was ready to go home. My shift was over, and the streets were quiet as I walked to my car parked a block away, in a dimly lit lot. As I approached my car, I noticed a figure leaning against it. My heart sank when I recognized him. It was the leader of the group I'd turned away earlier. His 3 friends were standing nearby, their faces shadowed but unmistakable. Didn't think you'd see us again, huh? The leader said, his voice low and menacing. What do you want? I asked, keeping my distance. My hand instinctively went to the small can of pepper spray on my belt. You disrespected us, man, he said, taking a step forward. You think you can just turn us away like that and we'll let it slide? You were drunk, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I was just doing my job. Yeah. Well, now it's time for us to do ours, he sneered. Before I could react, one of them lunged at me. I barely had time to dodge as his fist swung past my face. I backed up, pulling the pepper spray from my belt and spraying it directly into his eyes. He screamed, stumbling backward, but the others rushed me. I swung my flashlight, connecting with one of their arms, but the third guy tackled me to the ground. I hit the pavement hard, my head spinning as they started kicking me. Enough, a voice shouted. I looked up to see a man walking toward us, his silhouette outlined by the headlights of an approaching car. It was one of my co-workers, a fellow bouncer who'd just finished locking up the club. Get out of here, he yelled, pulling out his own flashlight and shining it directly at them. The group hesitated for a moment before retreating, running to their car and peeling out of the lot. My co-worker helped me to my feet. You all right, man? He asked. Yeah, I lied, wincing as I felt the bruises forming on my ribs. We called the police, who took our statements and assured us they'd keep an eye out for the group. But the damage was done. The next day, I handed in my resignation. No job was worth my life. I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I'm out late. The streets of Atlanta feel a little less safe now, and I've learned to always watch my back. Story 4. The Warehouse Workers. Working the night shift at a factory isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills. I've been on the graveyard shift for about 6 months, spending my nights running machines and making sure production stayed on schedule. It's repetitive, lonely work, but there's something peaceful about the hum of the machines and the stillness of the night. The factory was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by nothing but empty fields and a few scattered warehouses. It wasn't uncommon to go hours without seeing another soul, aside from my co-workers inside. Most nights, it was just me and the machines. Around 3 a.m., I stepped outside for a quick smoke break. It was one of the few perks of the job, getting a few minutes of fresh air and silence away from the noise of the factory floor. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that cuts through your jacket, and the parking lot was empty, except for my car and a few others belonging to the skeleton crew, working the shift. I leaned against the side of the building, cigarette in hand, and stared out into the darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of the streetlights lining the lot, their yellow hue barely cutting through the shadows. I was halfway through my cigarette when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, shadows shifting as the wind blew through the lot. But then, I saw it again. A figure standing near the edge of the lot, just outside the reach of the streetlight. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the stillness. The figure didn't respond. My heart rate picked up as I squinted, trying to make out any details. It looked like a man, tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes. Something about the way he stood, completely still, unnaturally rigid, sent a chill down my spine. I took another drag from my cigarette, trying to shake off the unease. It wasn't uncommon for homeless people to wander into the area, looking for a place to stay warm. Maybe that's all this was. "Hey, you all right?" I called out again, stepping a little closer. "You need something?" The man still didn't move. He just stood there, staring. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. He was wearing a mask, a plain white mask, like something you'd see at a Halloween store. Every instinct in my body told me to go back inside, but I stayed frozen, unable to look away. After what felt like an eternity, the man tilted his head slightly, as if studying me. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the lot. I put out my cigarette and hurried back inside, locking the door behind me. My co-worker Dave was at his station, completely unaware of what had just happened. "You all right?" he asked, glancing up as I passed by. "Yeah," I muttered, trying to shake off the encounter. Just cold out there. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, but I couldn't stop thinking about the man in the mask. Who was he? What was he doing out there? And why was he watching me? When my shift ended at 7 a.m., I walked out to my car, half expecting to see the man again. But the lot was empty, just like it always was. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. For the next few nights, I skipped my smoke breaks, staying inside where it felt safe. But the unease lingered. Every time I looked out into the parking lot, I half expected to see that white mask staring back at me. Weeks later, I heard a story on the news about a man who had been arrested in the area for stalking and attempted abduction. The report described him as wearing a white mask, matching the one I'd seen that night. It was a chilling reminder of how close I'd come to danger, and how a simple smoke break could have ended very differently. I still work the night shift, but I don't go outside anymore. Some risks just aren't worth taking. Thanks so much for listening to Nightmare Narratives. We hope you enjoyed these truly terrifying stories. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you'll know when we post new videos every Tuesday and Friday at 10 a.m. Central Time. If you have a scary story you'd like to hear read on the channel, email us at officialnightmarenarratives@gmail.com. and you might just hear your story in a future episode. Thanks again for listening, and stay spooky, friends. We'll catch you in the next one.